My dad has been somebody that I looked up to. What makes great leaders is you might be winning the game, but in reality, all of these things they're learning are exactly what we need in our democracy. I was able to see that spectrum of success and failure from a wins-loss perspective. Every day getting a little better. And that if we can string together those days, we're going to become the best version of ourselves. Sometimes it's just that it's having a conversation that would have nothing to actually do with the technical skill of what they're doing on the court or the field. If there's a way to help others and to serve others and to move things forward, then that's a good thing. Let's do that.
My name is Kyla Colbin. You're listening to my conversation with Joe Kennedy, and this is the Hunger and Heart Podcast. Enjoy the show. Hello, my name is Kyla Colbin, and welcome to episode 7 of Hunger and Heart, a podcast on the intersection of wild ambition and fierce compassion. My guest today is Joe Kennedy. Joe's experience runs from college basketball to the NBA to the White House. He worked directly with President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama on initiatives like the Let's Move campaign and developed a coalition of sports organizations, including the NBA, the WNBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the PGA, and many more. In this conversation, we talk about what he learned from his father, who was a legendary coach in his own right. We talk about the power of incremental improvement, and we talk about the connection between sports and civic engagement. So here you go, my conversation with Joe Kennedy. Welcome to Hunger and Heart. What is your experience with wild ambition and fierce compassion?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to have this conversation today. And, excited to kind of dive into all of these different topics and hopefully share some of my own experiences. Thinking about that, I'm brought back to some of the things in my own life and journey when I think about kind of being part of a locker room. And how important it is when you're on a team, whether you're a player, you're the coach, and building that sense of a common goal and a common understanding, a common set of values of where we want to go in a particular season, really requires a sense of compassion and empathy for others while you're competing to become the best you can be individually and as a team, and you're trying to accomplish your own personal goals, but also the goals of the broader group. And I think the idea of being able to kind of understand the others that are in that locker room with you and where they're coming from and what their life experiences are, and having some empathy about kind of where they're walking into that locker room. But then as you go through the course of the season, everyone's going to have good days and bad days as a player and as a coach, and like, how can you have compassion and empathy for what others are going through? My journey, that's really focused in college athletics, mainly in terms of my experience as a coach and as a player. I'm only 5'11" in real life, so I wasn't good enough to get to the NBA. My career peaked as a Division I player. I did coach 1 year in the NBA, but I was never good enough as a player. But so I kind of go back on my journey, and my dad was a Division I head coach for 33 years. So kind of leaning back into those experiences in the locker room and thinking about that compassion and empathy for others, and being able to connect with others is going to strengthen the team as you kind of every season goes through some type of this roller coaster of ups and downs. And usually you end up being a little better from a competitive standpoint when that connection and that sense of understanding what others is going through is really strong.
Interesting. I'm definitely going to come back to that final comment about being better from a competitive standpoint when we can connect with others. But first, can you tell me more about your dad? Like, what was he like as a coach? What are some things you learned from him? What are some things you saw him do that kind of have stuck with you? Like, yeah, tell me about your dad.
Yeah. I'm my dad has been, in addition to my dad, somebody that I looked up to with his own career, but he's also been someone who's just been my best friend as well. Like he's played these different roles in my life on a personal level. It's been really, really impactful. He stood up in my wedding, in addition to someone I looked up to as a coach for 40 years. I was fortunate as a kid growing up. I grew up as soon as I could after school. I was heading over to catch afternoon practice, right, or go to a game, or be there to see a recruit, or be around summer camps. Like I was just constantly around him and his teams, and had a chance to see that those dynamics working all the time. So I could see him, although I wasn't thinking about it as like a 7, 8, or 9 year old, right? But he was constantly leading a group every year. That's what he did. He got a team, and every year you had new dynamics and new people, new staff, new players, and he's leading a team. And some of those teams were wildly successful. Some of them were good. Some of them had tough seasons. So I was able to see that spectrum of success and failure from a wins-loss perspective, but also be able to see him kind of navigate that every single year. And from my dad, he worked for Jim Valvano, who became famous as Jimmy V. He was the head coach at NC State. They won the national championship in 1983, and like the greatest upset in the history of March Madness for basketball. And then Jimmy ended up going on to have this very public battle with cancer. And then the Jimmy V Foundation started as a way to raise money for cancer research. So my dad was really shaped in his 3 years working for Jimmy before Jimmy went to NC State, and then my dad became a head coach at the age of 27 at Iona College. So he was really shaped by Jimmy, and I think what he took from that he ended up handing over to me was these ideas around the power of enthusiasm and optimism was really central to everything that Jimmy built in his career. That also then turned around was really important in my dad's own career and his own successes and his own journey and how he built teams. So I always saw that from him, and grabbed that from him, and connected to that this idea of dreaming and having big dreams and working extremely hard to get there, but like having that off in the horizon of where you want to go, and then having a sense of optimism and positive energy every day to then go and reach those goals. And the last thing I think I would say on that is, again, kind of coming from Jimmy to my dad to me, was also wanting to be kind of innovative in how you do it. Jimmy was never a believer that there was one way to coach. There was one way to play a defense. There was one way to run a team or run your program, and that it was a dynamic process that required innovation all the time. And there was no right way or wrong way per se. And so I saw my dad do that and reinvent himself, and kind of go through that own journey of wanting to kind of be innovative in his own career and his own leadership style.
It's so consistent what you're saying with the messages that I've gotten from so many other guests on this podcast, which is that there is no formula, there is no playbook. You have to be present to what is in front of you and what this
Mhm.
needs. I'm really curious when you say about the how. I am really curious about specifically, you mentioned about optimism and dreaming and encouragement and vision. Can you give me a specific example of how it might look in practice to have a vision for a team, convey it to them, get them to buy into it? Like what does that look like in very tangible terms, in terms of how you're talking to the players, or what you do with them to get everyone aligned on that vision?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll try to give kind of some specific examples. I'll give one from my dad's career, and then I'll give one from my own career, if that's helpful. Um, my dad's career, he became the head coach at DePaul when I was in eighth grade. And he had been the head coach of Florida State for 11 years. He had this great opportunity to become the head coach of DePaul, had a really rich history of basketball, and it's in Chicago. So going into my eighth grade year, we moved to Chicago. And my dad wasn't from Chicago, but he really valued this long, great history that DePaul basketball had. And they had a tough 4 or 5 years, and part of his role was to try to come in and revitalize the program. So he really had at the top of his mind and the vision of what he wanted to build, that DePaul basketball should be Chicago's team, that it should really embody the values, the characteristics, the DNA of Chicago. And so even though he wasn't a Chicagoan, he's from New Jersey, he thought that was going to be so central to the success of the program. And that included who he recruited to the roster. So he made it a priority from day one to go get the best high school basketball players in the city of Chicago and convince them to come to DePaul instead of Duke or Kansas or North Carolina. So he did that. And his first recruiting class was the number one class in the country. And he had three Chicago kids that headlined that first class. Then, as they would kind of work to go market the program in the city, it's a Chicago's big city, it's a pro city. Most big cities are kind of based around the pro teams. So if you're a college team, how are you going to carve out your niche in this space? And so how are you going to go sell out an 18,000 seat arena? And so their whole pitch was, we're going to be Chicago's team, right? So we got these Chicago kids, come watch these unbelievable recruits from your backyard that you might have seen in high school or you've been following for years. Well, now they're wearing the blue and red of DePaul. Come out and follow them. So now all of a sudden the whole marketing and how they're selling the program before a ball ever gets dribbled on the court with this group is really centered around Chicago's team. And so ultimately, he was very successful, particularly in those first couple of years, to get some of these Chicago players from the area and really build a whole vision of the program, the people on his staff, obviously the players, as I mentioned, then how they talked about the program, then the community outreach to work with youth in the area. Everything was kind of tying back to the authentic connection to Chicago and to that DNA. And it ultimately was successful. They ended up going to the NCAA tournament with that group, and they were selling out the United Center and had a tremendous amount of wins, kind of coming back to that initial vision. Even as an outsider, he knew that vision would connect uh, with the city.
I want to hear the story from your coaching as well. I just want to pause there because I know I have a number of people tuning in from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And there are a couple of translation things that I need to clarify.
Please.
Like, when we're talking about college basketball and, first of all, when we say college, we're in the US, we're talking about university basketball. And the idea of selling out an 18,000 person arena for a university level sporting event. Like this is, and from that time, of course, sports at the college level have only grown, exponentially, right? Like I've got a friend now from New Zealand whose kid is she's playing volleyball at Iowa State. And, they have their own plane and it's a whole nother world. The thing that I want to home in on though is the thing that you're saying that I think is so transferable. It doesn't matter whether you're selling out an 18,000 person arena and have your own plane or whether you're leading a 3-person team in Christchurch, New Zealand, which is that the vision for what this would be played out on every single level of the team. So it starts with, we're going to recruit these players from Chicago. And then it's also how we communicate it, how we market it, how we think about ourselves, how we talk about ourselves, how we live and breathe it. And it comes back to the very first comment we were making about being present, which is that every time I've seen a theme try to be applied that is like at a superficial level, it falls flat. And when I see a theme that is a fundamental expression of who this team is and who these people are and what we care about, what we believe in, it doesn't matter whether it's corny or whether it's been used before or whatever. If it's true for us, then it has the impact. So I just wanted to make those points. And I do want to hear the story from your own coaching as well.
I appreciate you making that, helping to translate it to our international audience here. And I do think that authenticity is really so critical, right? And I think it's really really important. I would say from my own coaching career that we were fortunate to be part of a special team in, what was it, 2015, 2016, that season. I had just become the top assistant at Holy Cross, which is a smaller college outside of Boston, and came to work with the head coach who had coached me in college at Northwestern. And so I came to work for him there. And taking a first year of a program, and we're taking it over, and his style different from my dad's in some ways, but then in other ways there was clear overlap. you know his belief system also looked at this idea and this vision that where we want to go and to become the best team that we can become outside of wins and losses. These are the pieces that we have in our locker room. How can we become the best version of ourselves? And it was our first season together, so there's no real kind of floor there. There's no foundation. We're going to go through this experience and figure it out together. But was a really big believer in kind of every day just getting a little better and getting into the details of how we pull off and execute our system that we believe in. And we're just going to keep moving it forward every day, getting a little better. And that if we can string together those days over a period of time, we're going to become the best version of ourselves. And we were a team that had some lost some games, lost some close games, and our record didn't really show how good we thought we were and were becoming, but we kind of hadn't gotten over that hump yet. And then we were really fortunate as a group, and sometimes in sport, which is true in business and in other areas, where you kind of put in all this hard work, you're getting better, it's incremental, it's day by day by day, and then all of a sudden something might, kind of a flip of the switch, right? And for us, we kind of caught a little bit of that momentum and a little bit of magic in the bottle, and all of a sudden those days of stringing it together, we get hot, we end up winning our conference tournament, which was, we won 4 games in 7 days, all on the road, so none of our games were at home, so it's 4 straight road games. We go to the NCAA tournament, which in college basketball in the United States is a huge deal. March Madness, on television across the country, win another road game in Dayton, Ohio, and end up going out and losing a tough game to the University of Oregon. But we had this magical 3-week run together as a group in March, and I always go back to kind of that long journey of the months ahead of that magical moment that required this group to have a great connection and to believe in each other and to believe in what our system was to get better and just keep getting a little incrementally better. And no matter the kind of the wins and losses, that group maintained that level of commitment to each other to just keep getting a little better. And then we caught a little bit of magic in a bottle and had uh, uh, produced a memory that none of us will ever forget.
I love this story so much, and I have so many questions about it. Thank you for sharing it. Okay, so my first of all, I want to acknowledge what you said about how this phenomenon can happen in business as well, where we're seeing progress, but it hasn't yet translated to
Mm.
the results that we're looking for. And so my question to you is, how do you maintain the connection and the belief when you haven't yet seen the results? And at what point do you say, maybe our approach isn't the right approach?
Well, that's a great question. I'll pull on the example of that season. The things we valued never changed over the course of that season. And the kind of the heart of what we believed in doing, if you're kind of in the weeds of basketball and what our belief was, we also had a flexibility to make some changes and adjustments kind of in the weeds of the X's and O's and how we built the team. And we ended up making a decision on our defense that ended up really working out for us, but our defense over the course of a period of time had just been okay. And then we made this switch, which sometimes making that switch and takes some courage, right? And a little bit of nerve to say, we've been trying to do this one thing for a while. It hasn't quite gotten the results. We're not going to change our values of what we're building, but we're going to make this tweak. That takes some courage because you can make the tweak and it could not work, right? And then sometimes that you have others saying, well, coach or leader or executive, whomever, hey, that tweak didn't quite work. So it takes some courage to do that. But I think our coach and our staff, we came together and said, this is the best thing for this team. We got to make a little bit of a change. We're really close. Let's do this tweak. And then it worked, right? And I think that's part of the fun. It's part of the what gets you excited every day to get up and do your job is like it's dynamic. It's always changing. And I think you got to be ready to make those tweaks. But the things that we still valued from day one that were kind of central to our system of how we wanted to build the program and how we wanted to coach the game, that didn't change.
There's some things in there. So I want to touch on this idea of the courage that it takes to make a tweak and
Mhm.
the risk that it doesn't work, which of course is always a risk. And one of the things I find fascinating about human behavior is just how shit we are at measuring risk.
Mm.
And specifically, how shit we are at measuring the risk of what we are already doing. And so when we look at like, are we going to do this new thing? It's so common for us to be like, the new thing, but it could be a disaster, it could not work or whatever. And we so rarely say, but the current thing isn't working. So let's measure,
True.
like these two things against each other. And you're absolutely right. It takes huge courage to take that kind of step. And my invitation to people always is like, okay, what are we measuring against? Like, are we putting it in isolation going, it might not work? Or are we going, we're measuring it against something that already isn't working. And so the risk is actually quite a bit lower because if it doesn't work, we're pretty much where we're at now. I also heard you say about the keeping the core values the same, like being open to making these tweaks and adjustments, but keeping the core values the same. And it brought to mind Jim Collins and Jerry Porras and Good to Great and Built to Last, and that principle that they had of preserving the core and stimulating progress and
Mm.
going, there is a core here that is fundamental to who we are, that we believe in, that we're not going to compromise on. And back to the conversation earlier about being present, we're going to be awake to what is needed today in order to give life and to give effect to that core.
I love that. I love that. No, yeah, yes. I think keeping those core values and you got to understand what they are for you. I think it goes back to the authenticity piece as well, right? I think if you're leading an organization, you're leading a team, that people will see if it's authentic or not, those core values, right? It just comes through. So I think it's having that authentic piece, but yet still being able to kind of innovate and stimulate these other pieces are important. I think another thing I would you were saying that I wrote down was when you're I think it's a great value of sports is and particularly coaching is you have to constantly be evaluating why you're winning and why you're losing and be honest in that evaluation because you might be winning the game but in reality barely like you got to be really honest with why are we winning and why are we losing and even while that's happening we might be winning but it's really we're kind of playing with fire here because these things are happening and at some point that's going to bite us in the ass or we're losing kind of that team like at Holy Cross we're losing but we're this close and why are we losing and then in that season we figured out okay we could just get a little better defensively we're doing these other things good enough to win. Let's make this tweak to see if we can get better defensively. If we can, we think that might be the trick. And it ended up working out. And now we got over that hump from a wins and loss perspective. So I've worked for some great coaches that would constantly ask that question. Why are we winning and why are we losing? And really study that. And I thought that was valuable. And then in a season, which is you're doing that every time you play. So if you play 35 games, that's 35 opportunities to critically ask yourself, why are we winning? Why are we losing?
I love this. It's so consistent with what I hear from other successful coaches and successful leaders, which is the need for this searing honesty, this critical reflection, and this clarity of what is happening in front of me. Not what I wish was happening, not what I
Mhm.
hoped would happen, not what I was afraid would happen. What is actually happening in front of me, and what do I need to do about this? I'm really curious. We've talked about the translation of college basketball to a New Zealand context, and already you're operating at a level and with a level of scrutiny and funding and pressure that we don't really see here at that university level. Uh, Obviously, the NBA is then another level altogether.
Mhm.
And I'm curious about your experience with the kind of care and compassion that your dad embodied and that you embody, and how you saw that play out first in that college context with the level of pressure and commercialism and scrutiny. And then at the NBA, did you see a difference there? And
Mm.
it surprised you, or anything you found applicable to this kind of conversation?
That's a really good question. So, yeah, from my own experience and kind of comparing those two worlds of college versus pro, there's some inherent differences that I think touch on the question around care and compassion. But and I'll harp on that for a second. But I think what makes great leaders in those two levels is the deep and real care they have for the players, and for the team. So at the collegiate level in the United States, and there's some current stresses on this system, but traditionally speaking, you recruited someone to come to your institution to go through this 4-year journey to graduate and earn a degree that was also embedded in this idea that we're going to develop that individual to become the best version of themselves in this important time of 18 to 22 or 23, and they're going to get a degree, and you want to try to prepare them for a job, and you want to try to have them think about life after their sport in addition to becoming a great athlete. You're thinking of these life skills and the personal development of that individual. That takes a lot of care to do that well and to do it in a real, authentic way. And it takes compassion and empathy to understand where they're coming from, their family background and their challenges and their own dreams and aspirations. So in college, there is kind of a whole journey you would go on with a young person over the course of that 4 years, and very rewarding. When it happened, and I think when it was happened, you could really, as a coach and as a mentor, be just moved by where that individual could go on their own growth, and their own journey. In the pro world, because of the fact that you're dealing more with folks that are on contracts. So your timing and relationship, how long they're with you, kind of the structure of those dynamics are inherently different when it's a professional contract. You're usually dealing with folks that are older. They might have their own families. They've got other kind of personal dynamics that are different than the collegiate level, university level. But when you see some of the most successful coaches, I think across professional sports, even though pro sports inherently has a little more of a transactional relationship through those contracts, the ones that authentically cared, and wanted what was best for those individual players, are coaches that had a tremendous amount of success. I always think of, I'm a big fan of Greg Popovich, who's the head coach of the San Antonio Spurs, and Pop's had a really long career and different generations and rosters and teams. But you hear how many of the guys that played for him, whether it was a year or Tim Duncan, their entire career, just how real his care was for the well-being of his players, and how deep that was. And he really would spend time as the coach to get to know them on a personal level. Because it's easy at the professional level to just stay surface based off of this contractual relationship. But I always have heard and read stories about how he would intentionally really go deeper, to get to know somebody. And ultimately on that journey, when you get to know them better at that deeper level, you connect and you find out how to better coach them and motivate them and teach them than if you just kind of stay up here at this contractual level.
What's interesting is there is always discretionary effort, and
Mm.
that's not necessarily someone wanting to hold back or, being deliberately less than what they're capable of. I had a conversation with Richie McCaw, a celebrated rugby player, recently, where he was talking about a season that he was in where he was really kind of struggling to find his feet. And he went and had a conversation with the mental skills coach, and the conversation just completely turned it around. And the thing that was so interesting to me was that nothing changed in his technical skill, nothing changed in his desire and his ambition to be the best player he could be. But there's always a discretionary effort that we don't always know how to unlock it. And
Mhm.
without that personal connection, it becomes virtually impossible to unlock. The other thing, as you were talking, that you reminded me of was, obviously we do quite a lot of work with Crusaders Rugby. And one of the people we work closely with is a guy called Aaron Webb, who up until recently ran the Crusaders Academy, which was the academy for the up and coming, potential future Crusaders players. And you were calling him to mind for when you were talking about the kind of how we're thinking about this person as the whole person, and we're prepping them for their entire lives, not just for their basketball career. That was the kind of care that Webby brought to the academy. This thing where I'm not just gonna know you as a potential future professional rugby player. I'm gonna get to know your family. I'm gonna know what you care about. I'm gonna know what you're good. I'm gonna make sure you've got a job that's outside of this, and that you're building your academic skills, and that this is about growing a whole person so much more than it is about getting me results on the field.
Yes, 100%. And I would, I think as you do that as a coach or a leader, the other thing that you learn, because again, take sports as the analogy here, it's a season, so it's dynamic. There's ups, there's downs. You also like stuff's going on in people's lives, and being able to just have a pulse on that can really help you communicate and teach and connect with that person. And sometimes it's just that it's having a conversation that would have nothing to actually do with the technical skill of what they're doing on the court or the field that can help unlock or clear something out of their mind that allows them to kind of focus and get back to their sport. But if you're not thinking through that level of connection as a coach, you never have that conversation. There could be something that's really holding that individual back, and I think this is certainly true in an organization of any kind, versus you have that, you connect, you kind of remove that potential obstacle, or maybe not remove it, but they feel this sense of that you care, that there's empathy, that there's a connection. Okay, that they now maybe a little burden's been lifted, and now they can kind of get back to their job, get back to their sport. But you don't know that if you're not able to kind of ask questions and probe and connect in an authentic way.
All right, I'm going to ask you, that's a good lead into the number one question that I get when people are giving me questions to ask people like you, which is, let's say you have a player who is not performing, and let's say you have a conversation with them, and you show the care and the empathy or whatever, and let's say they're not up to it, they're not interested, they're not bought into the values, whatever it may be. The number one question that I get is, what do I do with my problem child? What
Mm.
would your take be on that question?
That's a really good question. Um, and I'll start by answering with this: is that not every person is the right fit for every single team or organization. That I think um, there is a cultural fit that is important, and not every relationship is meant to work out. So I think also being aware of that it's sometimes, it's just not the right fit is an okay result to get to, after that deep probing. And that would happen in coaching all the time, especially again in college, because you're recruiting someone, you recruit under this set of thinking it's going to be the right fit, and then you find out 24 months later, after a lot of hard work and trying and probing and connecting, it's just not the right fit. So I think there's kind of acknowledging that is really important. um yeah, I think a few tactics that I have tried over the years and I've seen others do, which is important. I think, again, using the sports example, sometimes connecting with others that have helped that individual on their own journey can be really helpful to learning more about them. So even though I'm trying to connect one-on-one with a player and it's just not it's something, it's not happening. Maybe they had, I think about talking to, okay, maybe their high school coach or someone else that was part of their journey at a different time in their life. And I say, I'm really trying to reach so and so. And here's kind of the barrier we just can't get over. Did this ever happen in your time leading and coaching, teaching, mentoring them? And sometimes without divulging private information, that could be a helpful conversation where they might give you a little something that could help you to connect with them. I think a little bit better. I've certainly used that to be helpful. Um, I think sometimes, again, I'm keeping the sports hat on. eh, eh, being able to use film was always a helpful tool. I think if we were connecting on something, maybe it was on something like effort. Hey, they think they're playing hard, but in reality, from our perspective, I know they could give more. They're not, the effort's not where it needs to be. Being able to bring somebody that type of uh, uh, film where it's not an opinion, but we're able to kind of show some real detail on, hey, this was a loose ball between you and the other player and the other team, and he beat you to it three straight times. This is what we're seeing here. I know you can do that, and here's why we're on you about your effort. And I know we're really struggling on that topic. You think you're playing hard, but I know you can play harder. Here's an example of it. So I think being able to have some of that type of kind of non-refutable teaching moments. I wouldn't even say that it's like evidence of like you're trying to make your point. It's you're trying to use it as a teaching moment, but bringing in something that's kind of not emotional, but a little bit clear cut, um, can be helpful in trying to make those points. And the last thing I would say is I had a coach say this before, and I thought it was really valuable. If you're thinking about leading a team, it can be sometimes hard to walk in the room and say, here's our values, here's our systems in basketball. All 15 players need to be bought in on immediately, right? And they're all just going to be like totally in the boat with you and they believe in all this stuff. His philosophy was a little different. Let me get one to be 100% in on our values and our systems. Then when I got that one, it'd be easier to get two. And then it'll be easier to get three. And it'll be easier to get, and then all of a sudden, over the course of a season, you're trying to get all 15. You might not get to all 15. Um, but because dynamics on the locker room and a team are always different, if you're trying to get all 15 from day one, sometimes you might go 0 for 15. But if you can figure out, I need to get this person, it's a little bit of the Ted Lasso, like who's that person I got to get to buy into this, to what we believe? Because when they buy in, two, three, four, five, six are going to come a lot faster. That might be harder. And again, you might not get all 15 to buy in, but I thought it was a really interesting perspective that this veteran coach gave to kind of building that buy-in from a group.
I love it. Okay, so you made 3 points. I've got thoughts on all 3 points. So the first point, which is that not every relationship is going to last, and
Mhm.
that is okay. I wrote an article about this recently, which was touching on the idea that we often carry that ending equals failure and staying equals success, and it doesn't. Ending and staying equals staying. And sometimes we stay when we'd be better off leaving, and sometimes we leave when we're better off staying. And they're just two separate concepts. And so being clear on that front. The point you made about film, and I just saw this like horrific. There was this horrific story that came out of Y Combinator, the venture accelerator, about this company that was using AI to monitor the people sitting at the, on the workstations and going, number 17, you are not fast enough, and how awful it was, and Y Combinator had to like pull their thing. And so obviously film in a work context can have these negative implications. But the thing that I was really reminded of when you were saying that was, I don't know if you know Cody Royal, the lovely Cody Royal, who's a coach of head coaches. And he wrote a book, and that he's written a few books, but one of his books, the title is Second Set of Eyes. And what you were just saying reminded me of, like, so often our role as coaches, as business leaders, is to be a second set of eyes. Because what I heard in that story that you were saying about, you've missed the ball three. I'm sorry, I don't know the technical thing you said, but you missed the thing three times in a row. You didn't pick up the ball fast enough, or whatever it was. That basically, for us, when we're in the moment, it can be hard to see those things. And part of our job is to help people see things that they might not otherwise be able to see. And so that second set of eyes concept is such a beautiful concept. And then the third thing was about you don't need to get all 15 at once, you get one. So in 2009, I trained with Al Gore as a climate project ambassador. And I delivered, climate presentations for a number of years. And I stopped doing it after a while. And the reason I stopped doing it was because I felt like I was either talking to deniers, or which was definitely going nowhere, or I was preaching to the choir, and it kind of
Mm.
felt somewhat pointless. And today I believe that I was firmly wrong about that. And the thing that I think I was wrong about was that I radically underestimated the value of preaching to the choir. And what happens when we preach to the choir is the choir gets stronger. And when the choir gets stronger, the folks who are kind of choir adjacent or like choir curious go, oh, maybe there's a party there. Maybe I should join. And so then they join, and then the choir gets a little bigger. And then we get closer to the next choir adjacent or choir curious layer. And your story about, I'm just going to get the one, and maybe the one brings the two, really reminded me of that. Just the value of going, I'm going to invest so deeply in this relationship. It's going to get so strong that, of course, the people who are like, on the periphery of that might get curious about it and want to come and be a part of whatever we're talking about. I will
Yeah,
say,
sorry, no, I was going to say, I think I love the choir analogy there, an example. I think there's others can then see that that individual is not just talking about, but they're like doing it. They're putting in the extra effort because they're fully bought in. And sometimes now it's not the coach recruiting number two. It's that number two sees number one doing it, and it's real, and they're putting in the extra effort. And I think the same thing can be true in like preaching to the choir. It's now so the people adjacent see that those people aren't just talking the talk, but they're so inspired and motivated. They're walking the walk. And now that's inspiring those people that are adjacent because those people are really doing the work.
it's hard to overstate the value of social proof and how much more powerful social proof is when it comes from people we perceive to be like us. So if I
Mm.
hear from my peer on the team, this is how we're showing up, it has such a materially different impact on me than if the coach is saying, this is what we are and this is what we're holding to account. I will say my little Al Gore story has led us into a political realm, and I want to. The thing that I'd love to hear from you your story of, which is an initiative that I just have so much admiration for. Talk to me about All Vote No Play. How did it come about? How did it? What was the impact? Like how? I mean, when you talk about, I'm looking at these college kids, these uni kids, and seeing the whole developing the whole person. All Vote No Play is such a beautiful example of that. Can you just tell us about that?
Yeah, I would love to. It's a really important story of my life and something I'm going to be deeply connected to for the years to come. Um, So I was coaching in 2020, and like so many others that summer in June after the murder of George Floyd, and we see what's happening across the country and across the world. And I'm coaching a group of 18 to 22-year-olds, and we're on Zoom, and we're unable to practice, but it's important to keep our connection strong. And so they had this moment that was really powerful that we needed to um, connect with our players about and open up some space for people to talk and to be real. And so as this is kind of going on across locker rooms and sports, coast to coast, a colleague of mine, Coach Eric Reveno, who was at Georgia Tech at the time, sends out a tweet. And at the end of the tweet, he's talking about the importance of athletes using their platforms to get involved and share their own voice and to promote being involved in the democratic process, not sitting on the sidelines. He ends this tweet with hashtag all vote no play. And it catches on like wildfire that summer. And I connect with Coach Rev and offer up my own time and energy. Say, Coach, if I can help you in any way, I would love to serve other students outside of just our own locker room to think about how they get involved in our democratic process. And I was pulling on my 4 years of working for senator, president, candidate, and then President Obama from 2006 to 2010. I was in that world, and so trying to think about some of those things I learned and how I could help Coach Reveno spread this message. And all of a sudden, we started working together, trying to reach out to locker rooms and coaches and programs across the country and to implore them to get their student athletes to get registered to vote and get educated on the issues and to participate in our democracy and not sit on the sidelines. And so that journey in 2020 led us to working with the NCAA, the governing body of college athletics, to get a rule passed that says that every team should take an off day from games and practices and have an on day for civics. We really started to think about, well, how can we get civic engagement to be a life skill that's integrated into the 4 year journey of student athletes? We have over 500,000 student athletes across the country, wildly diverse group by every possible metric. And yet they all have this shared journey of being an athlete and the things you're learning about how to be a great teammate and how to have empathy and how to have a shared goal and how to bounce back from losses and how to celebrate wins with sportsmanship and all of these things they're learning are exactly what we need in our democracy. It's exactly what's foundational to a healthy democratic culture and democratic institutions. So we leaned in, and did as much as we could that summer and fall. And then that led to, in 2021, meeting a mutual friend of ours who's an absolute rock star, and Lisa K. Solomon, who's a professor at Stanford. And Lisa brought her innovative design approach from her work at Stanford to Coach Rev and I's passion of wanting to work and support student athletes and coaches. And the three of us started to work on program ideas and concepts and pilots and trying different ideas around how we could support athletes and coaches to become more engaged citizens. And that continued to grow over time until in the summer of 2022, I left coaching to actually build an organization, to build a nonprofit around this all vote, no play movement. And we ended up building an organization called The Team with that same mission of how do we integrate civic engagement into college athletics and build these pathways for athletes and coaches to become more engaged citizens. And we are always thinking about how we can develop great teammates, inspire leaders, and empower citizens. But teammates, leaders, and citizens, there's an important through line there. And we thought it was key that we make that connection and work hard to integrate that across campuses nationwide.
I'm almost in tears, like hearing you. I mean, I know this story obviously, but it's such an important story. And the thing is, if we're growing teammates, leaders, and citizens, what we're also doing is growing these individuals' personal power and agency. And
Mhm.
we know that when we feel powerless, the likelihood of our disconnecting is so much higher, and the likelihood of stopping to engage. Literally tomorrow, is the 20-year anniversary of me arriving in New Zealand to live.
Wow, 20 years.
So 20 years tomorrow, I will have been in New Zealand. Before I moved to New Zealand, I lived in Colorado, and I did not do this at a national scale. I did not do this at an NCAA scale. But what I did do when I was living in Denver was, when it was election season, I would host election parties. And my election parties were not in any way designed to get anyone to vote in any certain way. My election parties were for us to sit down together and go through the ballot and be like, okay, just interpret what the question was. Because the questions were often worded in these like super convoluted ways. So it was like, vote if you don't want to renew the funding of the extension of the undone reverse funding of the light rail or whatever. And we just like read through it and be like, what are they asking us? So that when we kind of like, okay, if you want money to go to light rail, do no. And if you don't want money, like just so you can be clear. And it was such a a visible experience of how much work it takes to be an engaged citizen and how much work it takes to be part of the democratic process. And I just want to tell you this small story, because I think this thing of like what it means to be engaged and why it's important. So in 2000, I was living in Florida for the 2000 presidential election, which you will recall, but our listeners might not, was the infamous election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. And on election night, I was not in Florida. I was traveling. I was in New Orleans. We were on a road trip for my business, and it was the whole thing. And I didn't vote. I didn't vote. I couldn't be bothered. The absentee ballot was kind of a pain in the ass, and my vote doesn't matter anyway. And so, what's the point? So election night rolls around, and we're bar hopping in the French Quarter, and we go into the first bar, and CNN's on, and they're like, well, we've just called Florida. Of course, in the US, it's 48 of the 50 states are all or nothing states in terms of the Electoral College. And so, each state is a big deal. And really the ones that matter are those swing states. And Florida at the time was a much more prominent swing state. And now it's definitely gone much more Republican. But at the time, very much a toss-up. And so I walk into the first bar, and they're like, we've just called Florida, and we've called it for Al Gore. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, that's who I would have voted for. So awesome. We go into the next bar, and they're like, oh, whoopsie, did we say Gore? We meant Bush. And I'm like, oh, darn it, I should have voted, whatever. Go into the next bar, and they're like, oh, sorry, did we say Bush? We meant Gore. And I'm like, okay, great. Next bar, no, it's Bush. What's happening? Anyway, go back to my hotel, go to bed, wake up in the morning, turn on CNN. And the guy's standing there, and he goes, well, the election's still undecided, and it all comes down to the state of Florida. And I'm like, oh, darn it, I should have voted. And he goes, and one of the most hotly contested counties in Florida is Broward County, which is the county that I lived in. And I'm like, oh, darn it, I should have voted. And he goes, and I am broadcasting to you from Lester's Diner, which was the diner on the corner of my block that was like my local that I would go to every day for breakfast. And I'm watching this guy in horror, waiting for him to go, and you, Kyla Colbin, didn't vote, and we're all waiting for you. It was such an awful feeling. And here's the thing, like that election came down to 585 votes in the state of Florida. And still my one vote doesn't tip it either way, but it's a truckload harder to convince yourself that your vote doesn't matter when it's one of 585 than when it's one of, 130 million. And not only that, what happened for me was for 8 years, I felt like I had no right to an opinion. Like, here is this democracy. We've got this one tool that people fought and died for, and that like is so, and I couldn't be bothered to exercise like the most bare minimum tool. And so I became a total convert to, vote early and often, but like more to being informed. And I actually genuinely, I don't care who you vote for. I care that you become informed, and that you vote your conscience, and that you are paying attention to this precious thing fragile thing that we have, which is a democracy. Rant over.
Well, yes, I couldn't agree more about just, that importance of participation, and as an American, I'm even in some of our best moments in terms of electoral participation, we're still nowhere near where we should be. There are still millions and millions of people who don't exercise their right to cast a ballot every time there is a major election cycle. And yet, like I said, that's one of the ways that you are engaged in. You're empowering yourself to be part of to create the future you want. And we think presidential, right? You're bar hopping through the French Quarter, and you're thinking presidential. I'm sure as you go bar to bar in New Orleans, it's also, you might remember the next morning who won what. It's at the local level too, right? That it's those other ways that you're participating in the electoral process that you can have an effect on what's going to be happening in your local taxes and your school board and some of these other areas that can really make a difference in your life, where you're shaping your future. And you're only going to do that if you're in the game, if you're part of the process. I'm always reminded of also kind of, which I use as a sports thing as well, which is it's about, and this was President Obama, candidate Obama would stress this all the time as well. It's like, it's a long journey. It's about the journey and the process more than it is about kind of the destination and the result. Like you don't get to a stage of the democratic process and then like everything's solved, everything's done, close the book, and it's a never ending journey, and it requires staying in the process and in the game to keep moving things in the direction that you want to move things. And so I'm always constantly kind of brought back to that in this work that I've done with the team of wanting to think about how student athletes across the country can develop these habits of voting and volunteering in their community and having a deep sense of empathy for other people on their campus and in their neighborhood and in their community. That's going to stay with them for the rest of their lives. That's a lifelong habit. And data shows that if you're volunteering, if you're casting a ballot, when you're in that 18 to 24 range, you're gonna stay with you as a habit, just as you're developing a habit as a rugby player or a baseball player or a golfer or a basketball player. And that's a habit we want all of our young people to have and to stay with them, regardless of who you're voting for. Being part of the process, shaping the future the way that you think it should be shaped for you, your family, your community, your friends. That's important. Versus, like I said, sitting on the sidelines and not really participating, not really having a meaningful voice. So I can relate to your story, and I think it also relates to the message we try to get to the young people we work with across the country through that nonprofit.
Joe, we only have just a couple minutes left. My final question is, you obviously then, had this experience at college basketball, you had this experience at the NBA, and then you went to, one of the biggest stages in the world, which is, being involved with the White House. What did you see specifically in terms of this conversation that we're having, in terms of having, global impact, showing up with heart and compassion while operating at, I'm going to use a harsh word, like the most kind of cutthroat level or the most cutthroat environment. How did you see that play out? And was it harder? And was it as important, less important, more important?
I would say in my 4 years in that world, I think a couple things that jump out to that question, see if it answers it. One is when you travel and you meet people, it puts a face on policy. And you can develop a sense of compassion and connection with people that all this stuff that's getting argued over here and what you're seeing in the news, ultimately, there's policy decisions that are made that directly affect the lives of people. And when policymakers and people in the political space forget that, or they don't constantly come back to the compassion that's needed to connect to that void's created, and then your policies ultimately are really out of line with how you can positively help people. And so I think I learned that. I did 2 years on a campaign, 5 different states, mainly in Iowa, but constantly meeting people that were just going through their daily lives. But there was a particular issue that really affected them. Maybe you're a veteran and it was your benefits through the VA. Maybe you had a pre-existing condition and healthcare was really important to you and your family because you couldn't get insurance because you had this pre-existing condition. Maybe your children had a learning disability, and being able to have some resources in your public education system to try to help them so they're not just a number in the back of the classroom, but there was a real pathway to get them some extra help. Those all then laddered up to policy decisions that could directly affect people's lives. That made a deep connection, knocking on people's doors and going to community meetings and going to churches and going to gymnasiums and just meeting folks that are trying to live their best lives. But knowing that when we'd sit down to talk about a policy issue, it was real to them because it made a real difference in their life. So I'll always think about that when we're in the kind of the political space. And the other thing that I learned from certainly, I think part of President Obama's philosophies around, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good and of making progress, right? And we can do that, and then ultimately you're not really making a difference in that person's life. But if there's a way to help others and to serve others and to move things forward, even though it might not be perfect, but we can get 80% there, and it's going to make their lives easier when it comes to that educational needs they have for their children, for their VA benefits, for their healthcare needs around a pre-existing condition, let's say, then that's a good thing. Let's do that. And then you know what? Let's then go battle and persuade and communicate and connect to get that other 20%, versus going over and getting nothing. And so that's where his messaging around it's a long journey and you got to stay in it and you got to keep going and keep going and keep going kind of always resonated in the work we tried to do for those years that I served.
Amazing. What a beautiful place to close on. This don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Coming back to what you said earlier, that our job is to show up and be a little bit better every single day. And that these are about lifelong habits and about a process that is always unfolding. There is no destination in this game. And really, it brought to mind for me this idea that democracy is a relationship. And it's a relationship that we have to keep alive every single day and invest in every single day. Joe, what a gift it's been to talk to you for this hour. I've enjoyed our conversation so much. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join me on the pod. So appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great to have the conversation, and grateful for the chance to be here with you today, and all the amazing work that you're doing. Just great to have the conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to let me know your feedback. You can reach me on hello@kylakolbin.com. My favorite part of this conversation was the vision that Joe had to see that all of the lessons that you learn as an athlete, how to be a great teammate, how to have empathy, how to have a shared goal, how to bounce back from losses and celebrate wins with good sportsmanship, that these are all the things we need in our democracies. This message couldn't be more timely, and I feel so fortunate to amplify it. Thanks again for listening, and be sure to tune in next week for my conversation with the Director of Partnerships at Red Bull Racing and Red Bull Technology, Julia George. Hunger and Heart is brought to you by the Crusaders Leadership Programme. Whether you're coaching under fives or a professional team, we all want the same thing: to build a culture of trust, to get the best out of your people, and to grow players into leaders. The Crusaders Leadership Program lets you get up close and personal with some of the greatest rugby legends of all time. People like Sir Wayne Smith, Sam Whitelock, Kieran Reid. You'll connect with a global group of ambitious, caring coaches from a range of codes and backgrounds. And most importantly, you'll gain skills and techniques to drive impact and outcomes for your team. The Crusaders Leadership Program is a 2-week, high-intensity virtual experience. It is delivered exclusively online, accessible from anywhere. Hunger and Heart listeners get 10% off the full price of the program. Use the code HUNGER at checkout. You can find out more about the Crusaders Leadership Program at crusadersleadership.com. That's crusadersleadership.com. Hunger and Heart is created by BOMA and the entire BOMA team, including Tito Bernal, Ray Jangle, Hannah Hudson, Johanna Coxon, Samil Unka, and me, Kyla Kolbin. Thanks for listening.